talking about something that's quite difficult, violence against women, and how I think we can begin to take this on, one of the solutions. It's a really difficult subject, so before I get started, I want to say that I'm not here to judge as an outsider, though perhaps one might assume that looking at me. I've been in India for 17 years. I fell in love here. I got married here. I built my career here. I've worked with amazing people, researchers, activists, governments across the region. We're trying to make things better, trying to find solutions. So this is my home. I'm talking about my home, my country, my city, my community, my family. This is where I hope to spend my life. I have 2 children. Both of them were born in Delhi. They've spent their whole life here. This is what they know. I have a 9-year-old daughter. She had decided that she was going to be the chief minister, not just one chief minister. She was going to be the chief minister of Kashmir and Delhi, because she loves both places, and she had it figured out. She thought, you know, it's different kinds of challenges. She could go by helicopter back and forth. And she thought that would work just fine. But then the other day she thought, you know, I've been thinking about it, and what if there was an earthquake? Then I couldn't really be in both places, so I'm going to have to decide. But she's not ready to decide. She's going to take some time and think about it, because she knows she's anyway only 9, so she's got some time. My 6-year-old son has decided, he had first decided that he was going to be a famous cricket player. So that was his plan. And then he started playing football. So then he thought maybe that he would become a famous football player. But again, he's also sort of hasn't quite taken a decision, and he thinks he might do both. So since he's decided to leave the work of governing and governance to his sister, he's just given her some suggestions. He wants her to deal with the garbage. And he also told her that whichever state she decides to be a chief minister in, she should have double-decker buses, because he thinks they're really cool, and he thinks that should be part of her platform, to have double-decker buses. So, you know, my kids have big dreams for India. They have big dreams for themselves, as they should. And they have big dreams for this country. And so do I. I have dreams for my daughter's future in India. I dream that she can take a bus by herself without being harassed. That she can walk the streets in safety, wearing whatever she wants, and not be disturbed. That she can have all of the same adventures, opportunities, and experiences as my son. I dream of an India in the future that will have tackled this issue of violence against women. An India that is a global leader in tackling this issue of violence against women. That where people go to other countries, like my country, Canada, and you know, every country is struggling with this issue. And I dream of a time when India can go and help other countries address this issue. So today, even though I may not look like it, I am speaking about my country, my city, Delhi, my home, my family. And, you know, we're all struggling with this problem, but I think we can all be part of the solution. And I want to talk about one solution that I see to this problem facing us. I think we all can remember December 16th, about 6 weeks ago. On December 16th, a 23-year-old woman, a student like all of you, in Delhi was brutally gang raped and murdered. Nirbhaya was one of the few from her village that had made it into college. Maybe some of you are among the few from your place who've made it into college. She had a professional career ahead of her. She was a citizen of a country that's lauded as one of the greatest democracies in the world. But that didn't protect her. In her, I don't know what it was. I don't think anybody knows what it was. But maybe people could see themselves. Maybe they could see their daughters. Maybe they could see their sisters. Maybe they could see their friends. Or maybe it was the sheer ugly brutality of the attack. But whatever it was, people stood up. Thousands of people, horrified, angry, grieving, took to the streets and they said, enough, enough. We have to stop. We have to end this war on women. Sadly, India is not alone on this. I work throughout South Asia. I also work in China. Most countries in India in South Asia share a lot of these same anti-women realities. Every country in this region has their own list of nirbhayas. The researcher Naila Kabir had a wonderful, awful, searing article a few weeks ago, and she named some of those nirbhayas on that list. In Bangladesh, she spoke of 14-year-old Yasmin, a young domestic trying to return to her parents' village, picked up, gang raped, and murdered by 3 policemen. Also in Bangladesh, there was Seema. She was traveling home with her boyfriend. She was picked up and put into safe custody at the police station, where she was gang raped by 4 police officers, and she died a few days later. In Pakistan, Mukharan Mai gang raped on the orders of elders in her village, and Kainat Samru, only 13, gang raped by local village thugs. I read all the regional newspapers. Yesterday I was reading the Tribune from Pakistan. Another 9-year-old girl kidnapped, gang raped, dropped near her home. In India, there's Mathura, a 16-year-old tribal girl, gang raped by the police in the police station, even as her relatives were outside the police station trying to lodge a complaint, not knowing what was happening inside. The list goes on. It could fill my whole presentation. And those are only the cases that we read of. The vast majority hidden from sight, the names we never know. But the response, people's response that's happening right now, that we see on the streets, coming out, saying enough, is important. And I think it's important for India, and I think it's also important beyond this region. And I'm going to argue possibly for the world. But what are we going to do about it? How do we make sure that our collective anger, our grief, how do we make sure that something happens from this? I'm here to argue that part of the answer lies in measurement. I'm an evaluator. I'm a researcher. I try to figure out whether things are working or not. Those things could be policies, they could be programs, they could be interventions, they could be projects. They're the things that people are doing to try and change things. So, but are they working? Are those efforts working? That's what I try to help people figure out. Evaluators have a saying. It's measure what you treasure. I'll say that again, because that's kind of the theme of my talk. Measure what you treasure. Why? The things you measure are often the things that you strive for. When you measure things, you can find out whether they're working or not, whether they're working in the way that you thought they would. You can push for change. A classic example is a student report card. Schools report on the child reaching certain targets. Teachers, students, parents, they can see if the child is reaching their goals. If they're not, they find ways to strategize to try and improve the marks, etc. So the report card helps them figure out whether things are working or not. But at a larger level, societies also have goals, and they choose things to treasure, and they choose things to measure. So what do our societies, what does India treasure? What are we spending our time measuring? Again, the theme today is growth for all. And if we look at what we currently measure, what we spend an awful lot of time pursuing, seeking, we can see that it's overwhelmingly economic growth. And, well, I mean, growth, we know that growth has played a tremendous role in decreasing global inequality. And yet, we see an increasing call that it's not enough, that maybe we're not focusing on the right things. None other than Amartya Sen warned that our obsession, he called it an obsession with growth rates, is misplaced. And I quote, he said, "The lives that people lead are only partially influenced by growth." So maybe we've got something wrong. But paradigms are powerful. Because we're convinced that economic growth is the solution, or the main solution, and the main thing we have to focus on, this is what we seek out. This is what we drive for. This is what we put our resources towards. And we hope that growth and other work on areas like education and health, we hope that somehow they'll take care of things like violence, that those things will sort of just change along with economic growth. But Nirvaya suggests that this hope is perhaps misplaced. Okay, there's been tremendous progress in many fields. Yes, the gender gap in education in India is decreasing. It's closing, in fact. Many more women are now in the labor force in India, in Bangladesh, than ever before. And reservations in India have increased the women in local governance, in elected representation, tremendously. These are all incredibly important things, and there's been tremendous progress made in them. But I think we probably may all accept that we aren't seeing the transformation in values, in norms, in ideas that we also want to see in development. We're seeing continued violence. So what we treasure has brought some development, but it seems to have neglected human development. Let's take an example. India and Bangladesh, neighboring countries, they share many of the same things in common. And if we take economic growth to be the goal, hands down, India wins. India's GNP per capita is over double that of Bangladesh. So in the growth game, there's no competition. But what if we measured different things? What if we wanted to look at something else? What if we looked at sex ratios? So sex ratios are the ratio of males to females in the population. So naturally, you would have an almost equal sex ratio. You would tend to have a bit more men in a population than women, through everything else being equal. Now, Bangladesh's sex ratio is 978 women per 1,000 males. It's not bad. India, on the other hand, in the last census, recorded districts with as low as 850 women per 1,000 men. This number reflects millions of missing girls. These are girls that should be in the population but aren't, because female fetuses were aborted, or because the girls that were born had unequal distribution of resources. So they got less food, they were not taken to the doctor if they were sick, etc. So because of that, you've got millions of missing girls in India. And the same is true if you look at all kinds of other figures. Let's take another example. In Bangladesh, 194 women die in childbirth for every 100,000 live births. Just to give you some sense of comparison, in Canada, 7 women die out of every 100,000 live births. So in Bangladesh, the number is 194 women. But in India, it's 250 women. 250 women die for every 100,000 live births. I mean, the numbers are way too high in India and Bangladesh. But Bangladesh is doing a lot better than India, despite India having much higher rates of growth. So, and much lower rates of poverty. So why hasn't India's growth success transformed itself into gender equity? So let's talk about that a little bit. What shapes the things that government policies, the policies that they put in place? What shapes the governments that we elect? Like, why do we choose who we choose? Why do they do what they do? A lot of these things are shaped by these paradigms or these big ideas, or discourse. I mean, there's lots of fancy words for it. You're all students, so you're aware of these. But these, essentially we're talking about our ideas on how the world works and how things change and how things can get better. And one of them is the idea that growth will reduce gender inequity. And this kind of idea is rarely challenged or questioned. It's just taken as a fact. It's only when we really come to a time where we're changing our discourse and we're changing our understanding of the way things work that we even question these. And I would argue that we're in such a time. I believe that if we treasured and we actually measured different things, whether it's in Pakistan and India and Nepal, I think we could actually get change much faster. So how do societies change? It's the big question. And how do we know if they're changing or not? There are lots of examples of how measurement can make a difference. One success that I'm going to talk about here of using measurement to drive change is the Millennium Development Goals. So these goals were set in the year 2000, and they were signed by 189 countries. Most of the countries in South Asia were signatories. So a lot of people, and I include myself there, thought that these goals would just be another declaration, another area announcement with no teeth and nothing would happen. But I was wrong, and people like me who thought that were wrong. The MDGs weren't filed away and forgotten. In fact, what we saw was that countries signed on to them, and they actually began to set really concrete targets and goals and try and achieve those goals. And if you take the example of Ethiopia, one of the things they decided was they were really going to cut infant mortality by 60%. That's pretty specific. And what they did was they got Kerala, they looked to Kerala, and they had experiences, they drew on experiences in Kerala in setting up community health centers. They set up 15,000 of them. And over the period that has come since 2000, they've actually reduced infant mortality by 60%. So these things can work. And by focusing on measurement, checking, are these things working? Are the health centers working? Are we getting the decreases? That can tell people whether what they're trying is working or not. So I talked about what are some of the things that we can do. One of the things, why not make violence against women one of the MDGs this time? It wasn't included as one of the MDGs in the last round. And if we did that, then our governments would have to set targets, we would have to figure out how to measure them, and that's where we put some of our resources. We could, even if we don't have an MDG goal on violence against women, we could also set up targets ourselves in our own countries. So we could create a report card for our governments. So instead of looking at things like math or English or attendance, although attendance is probably a good thing to look at in the case of some of our governments, we could look at scores for the number of politicians with rape charges against them, and we could set a target of 0. We could look at the way police handle complaints of rape, and again, we could set targets there. We could have a score for the justice system. Last year, 635 cases of rape in Delhi, only 1 conviction. So we could track that. So I think the question, though, is what do we treasure? And that's my message. We need more and different kinds of measurement. It may seem basic, but it's really actually not often done, and it's not hard to get right. Because the problem doesn't just lie out there, as the other speakers have been talking about. The problem also lies within. If we want zero tolerance, we can put in place the goals, the targets, the systems to measure where we're getting there. We can use them to push our governments. We can push them to push ourselves to learn what's working, what doesn't work for addressing these issues. And I would argue that if that happens, Mirabai may not have only woken all of us up here in Delhi in India, but she may help to wake up the whole world to this issue. Thank you.